You ever have one of those days where someone strolls onto your porch and tells you your house suddenly belongs to them? Yeah, that happened. I was on my hands and knees in my dad's old living room restoring these beat-up hardwood floors with his ancient hammer, just minding my own business, when Diana Morrison walked right through my doorway. No knock, just a whole lot of attitude and a folder thicker than my tax returns. First thing out of her mouth, I owed $800 in HOA fees. I actually laughed right there in her face. My property sits 52 feet outside the HOA's jurisdiction, something you could verify in 5 minutes if you've ever met a real estate attorney, which, as it happens, I was for 30 years. But apparently she thought I'd just roll over and write a check. Now, I've seen some wild property disputes, but nobody's ever tried to muscle in on my childhood home and claim it for the community. Diana had the sort of crisp, confident voice that meant she'd done this before and probably gotten away with it. She had on a navy suit businesslike as a tax collector on a Saturday morning and strutted up my driveway in a silver BMW like she was there to audit my entire life. She rang my bell twice, impatient, then pounded on the door. You know the type never smiles with their eyes. Thomas Harrison. She asked, clipboard held up like a badge. We need to discuss your property compliance issues immediately. And I just stood there still holding Dad's hammer, staring at her like maybe I'd inhaled too much sawdust. I told her straight up there must be some mistake. This house isn't part of any HOA. I bought it for that exact reason. She smirked and said, I'm afraid you're mistaken, Mr. Harrison. We've expanded our boundaries under the Community Development Act. Your house now falls within our jurisdiction. $800 in assessment fees plus monthly dues, and you've got 30 days to fix your architectural violations. She started spreading out documents all over my porch table, territorial maps, compliance checklists, the works. But the second I looked at them, I could see it was all smoke and mirrors. The statute numbers were made up. The signatures were shaky. The Community Development Act was as fictional as Bigfoot. I called her bluff, told her I'd need to see the legal authority for this so-called expansion. She doubled down, got that brittle smile back, and started talking about community standards. That's when I realized she wasn't expecting a fight. If I refused to pay, I asked. Well, that would be unfortunate for everyone involved, she said, dropping the fake sympathy act. Legal action is expensive. Community standards must be maintained. It was a threat plain as day wrapped up in a ribbon of neighborly concern. I'd seen it before, bullies in business suits counting on people folding under pressure. What she didn't know was I read ledgers, not letters. And her authority was nowhere on mine. I picked up Dad's old level, same one he used to build that porch, and felt this steady kind of anger. I told her I'd review the paperwork with my attorney. She started warning me about delays complicating matters. I could tell she'd done her homework, knew I was recently retired, living alone, doing my own repairs. She probably thought I'd be easy prey. What she didn't know was I'd just found the line you do not cross, threatening my home. I watched her drive off, then sat on Dad's porch with those fake documents spread out in front of me, sunlight coming through the oaks. I started making calls, first the county recorder, then some old contacts at my law firm. If Diana wanted a legal fight, she was about to find out why they called me the document hunter. By sundown, I had a stack of real paperwork proving my property was well outside any HOA boundary. The act she cited didn't exist. There was no record of any expansion, and here's the twist, the real Emerald Hills HOA board hadn't approved a thing. The next morning, I compared her phony map to the actual county survey. Her lines bulged just so to conveniently snag my front yard. I found a 47-year-old brass property marker still there, right where Dad put it. I measured 52 feet from it to my house, just like the survey said. Morrison's map claimed the HOA line cut through my driveway. Not a chance. But the real surprise came when I called Patricia Williams, the HOA's secretary-treasurer. Turns out not only was Diana not the president, she wasn't even on the board. And 3 other homeowners had already paid her thousands for the same scam, thinking it was just official business. Patricia and I agreed to meet. That night, sitting at Dad's kitchen table, I laid out every piece of evidence. Patricia brought her own folder thick with complaints. Turns out Morrison ran a property development company and had been angling to get the HOA to approve her expansion schemes for years. When they wouldn't play ball, she made her own rules and started targeting vulnerable homeowners just outside the boundaries. Patricia's list of victims was heartbreaking. Elderly folks, new families, people too trusting, too worried to ask questions. I realized this wasn't just about my house. Morrison had built an operation out of intimidation, forgeries, and fake authority. I decided right then I wasn't just defending my own property. I was going after her for everyone she'd threatened. The next day, the real HOA president called me Robert Carter. I filled him in. Turns out Morrison had access to Meridian Property Services, the neighborhood's landscaping and management company, and was using their data to pick her targets. She'd been a consultant for 18 months, quietly harvesting information on who was elderly, who was new, who might be too alone to put up a fight. We gathered evidence, called an emergency board meeting. Word spread fast. By the time I stood up at the community center, the place was packed. I laid out Morrison's whole scheme, the fake maps, the forged signatures, the threats, the data mining through Meridian. You could feel the mood shift in that room, fear giving way to fury. Ordinary folks, realizing they'd been scammed by someone who looked official, talked the talk but didn't have a shred of real authority. Then Morrison herself walked in cool as ever with that fake smile, acting like she was just there to clarify misunderstandings. But the more she talked, the worse it got. She tried to bluff, to threaten to act like this was just a big mix-up. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly widow who'd paid her $200, stood up and called her out, voice trembling but clear. "Young lady, the only criminal behavior I've witnessed is you taking my money under false pretenses." The whole room erupted in applause. Morrison tried to talk her way out, but Robert Carter handed her the real HOA bylaws and asked her to point to any page that gave her authority. She couldn't. She tried to storm out, but not before I asked her loud enough for everyone to hear why she'd threatened Mrs. Thompson with foreclosure. She spun around, all the pretense gone, and doubled down on the threats right in front of 60 witnesses and 3 folks in the back quietly taking notes, probably prosecutors. She'd confessed to extortion on record with her own words. From there, it was a matter of mopping up. We filed criminal complaints, civil suits notified the DA, and by Christmas, Morrison had pled guilty to fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. 4 years in federal prison, full restitution to every victim, and Meridian Property Services shut down for good. The state passed new laws, the Community Fraud Prevention Act, making sure scammers like Morrison couldn't use HOA authority as a weapon again. You want to know the best part? Our community came out of it stronger. Neighbors who never used to speak now watched each other's backs. Patricia, Robert, and I set up a Saturday morning coffee hour to share news and double-check anything that looked suspicious. The brass boundary marker Dad put in the ground in 1976 is still out there now, with a garden around it, a plaque that reads Community Protected 2023. I even got appointed honorary legal advisor, which is just a fancy way of saying, if this ever happens again, call Tom first. Funny thing, Morrison thought she could take what mattered to us because she saw homeowners as isolated marks. She didn't count on what happens when neighbors stop being scared and start working together. She didn't count on ordinary folks turning into a force nobody can intimidate. She sure didn't count on a retired attorney who wasn't quite as retired as she thought. So tell me, how would you have handled it? Ever been targeted by some self-proclaimed authority? Drop your own wild HOA stories in the comments. Let's see how deep this rabbit hole really goes. And hey, if you believe justice still matters, hit like, share this with a neighbor, and click the next story. Some things are worth fighting for, you know what I mean?